Surgeons who work with amputating limbs, what was your worst OF moment? When the blood was green. A rare disease caused by overdose of migraine medicine. Surgery resident here. The oh fuck moment doesn't really happen in the OR, but can happen after. One consideration is always at what level do you need to amputate. The toe, a transmetatarsal, BKA or AKA, below or above knee amputation. If you decide too much, some sicker or more elderly patients may never regain mobility again. If you choose too little, the disease process, infection, or ischemia, might not be controlled or won't heal and you end up going back for more. The realization you have to go back for more is the moment. Not a surgeon but a leg amputee, I was reading the notes from my surgery and the doctor stripped the screws when trying to remove the titanium plate that was holding my leg together. He had to call in backup. The first surgery I saw as a nursing student was a toe removal. Poor patient had to have his big toe removed due to a diabetic ulcer that had gotten infected. I was so afraid of the thought of getting nauseous with my first surgery, I didn't eat breakfast that day. The case started at noon. I was wrapped in the sterile gown and mask/hair cover/shoe covers. I was positioned by the circulating nurse in a spot with a great view but wouldn't get in the way. The case started and the doc started cauterizing bleeding veins/capillaries right off the bat. I learned that cauterizing flesh smells a lot like searing steak. My empty stomach and hungry brain didn't know the difference, and I could hear my stomach growling at the smell. I thought it would be just my embarrassment, until the surgeon and nurse both looked at me. They could hear it too. I'm not sure what I said, but I was glad my mask hid how I was struggling not to cry. It was awkward until the doc took the severed toe and tossed it over the patient and into the formalin container. He had great aim. I want a real surgeon to come and tell a story about when they locked their keys in the car or something. Or nurse here. Recently did a below-the-knee amputation. The leg was severed and I was passing it off to the circulating nurse for specimen. Went to take a clamp off a large artery and my poor co-worker got a big spray of blood. Felt terrible. I'm not a surgeon but I did rotate in surgery back in my med school days. My first day on surgery rotation I was assigned to the trauma team. This was at a level 1 trauma center in an inner city hospital in New York. It just happened that on my first day, all the residents were in a meeting, so when the trauma surgeon needed an assistant, she asked me to join her for an emergency above-knee amputation of about infected leg, wet gangrene in a very poorly controlled diabetic. So my first day on surgery I'm in the OR holding this man's infected leg while the surgeon saws it off. After she's done, she literally squeezes out pus from the thigh. The odor was putrid. It's one of those smells that lingers for days. For the surgeon it was just another day, but for me it was definitely an oh fuck moment. Medical student, future orthopedic surgeon. On my vascular surgery rotation, we had a gentleman who initially came in after a left TMA, transmetatarsal amputation, where your toes are amputated, that wasn't healing and becoming infected. The next step after that was a BKA, below knee amputation, in an effort to both stop the infection from progressing higher up his leg and also be able to receive adequate blood flow to heal. That surgery was executed well, but unfortunately the day he was cleared to work with physical therapy, he fell on the other, right, knee, which created a hematoma that later became infected. About a month later, when I had transitioned from vascular to orthopedics, we performed a salvage aka above knee amputation on that leg. Our gentleman went from being able to walk with difficulty to losing both legs in the span of about 2 months. I remove a lot of eyes. When training, I had a nasty one that I just couldn't grip with forceps while I was making the main cut in the optic nerve. I had to resort to gripping it with my fingers. As you are imagining, I made the cut, it shot through my fingers like a grape, hit me in the chest, rolled down my gown, bounced off my foot and rolled about 10 feet on the floor, leaving a bloody snail trail. It was a lunch break change, so about 10 people were in the room switching over. I headed upstairs when I was done to join my preceptor in another case. He sees me walk in, sees a bloody spot on my shoe cover and asks, "You didn't drop the eye, did you?" My head just sank. Not a surgeon, but I work in a facility that helps with rehabilitation of amputees and getting them walking again. I watch a resident go to stop a door from closing with his stump and it was like the world slowed down. From the moment I saw him move his stump to stop it, to the point of impact I was screaming, "Oh fuck, that's gonna hurt so bad." And it did. He looked at me and just cried. I pushed him back to his room in his wheelchair and he apologized profusely, saying that it's just instinct cause he had a leg there for so long. He ended up splitting the stitches back open and the infection that came after ended with him going from a mid-shin amputation to above the knee the next week. He was a great guy. He's walking and back to living his regular life again. Comment translation provided by you/cataclysmic here. https://www.reddit.com/r/ascreddit/comment/e2y4jb/surgeons_who_work_with_app_ios_media=sign share ampersand UTM_name=sign ios_app. Back in my trauma surgeon days, we had a pretty major fracture dislocation situation in a dude's right humerus with associated degloving. His brachial artery was tangled up in the bony mess, and we took him to theater overnight. We were there for 10 hours, the vascular consultant, the ortho consultant, and 2 registrars/residents, me and 1 other. We were ready to source graft, amputate, or ORIF, or X-fix. The OT nurses probably hated us, because we had to maneuver everything while also having X-ray in the process. I'll be honest, we were physically and mentally exhausted by the end, and we thought we got away without amputation. But no dice, we had to take him for a reloop the following night. Only problem was the vascular consultant was in theater dealing with the AAA, so you've got 3 ortho surgeons and a petrified vascular rake and this mangled arm. And it's not an anatomical arm like in the textbooks, nothing is where you expect, even though 3/4 were there the night before, you have to reprogram your muscle memory. The whole procedure was an oh fuck moment. We had to remove all the metal we'd put in the night before, which keeping the arm stable enough to not rip the soft tissue so that the stump could be modeled healthily. It all went well, but many people were bricking themselves that night. I was first assisting on a emergent guillotine ankle disarticulation. You basically just rip and cut the foot off from the leg and leave the bone sticking out. I was providing traction on the intensely infected foot while the surgeon sliced through the remaining tendons holding it in place. When the last one snapped, I fell back, holding onto the now independent foot, squeezing a load of green pus out onto my chest. Was just thankful it hit the gown and not my exposed neck. Surgeon here. Have a few stories. 1. Called to the ED to evaluate a table saw injury to arm, found a mid-forearm almost complete amputation hanging on by a skin bridge. We were able to reattach it and I think the patient has good muscle function but tenuous sensation back now. 2. My intern year, got a consult for a cyclist who was blindsided by a pickup truck, entire leg was completely mangled. He arrived intubated and sedated with lots of other injuries, dude never woke up. It was the first time I saw a leg filleted open from trauma, with exposed femur, also fractured, and multi-level open tip fib fracture, just hanging out of the tissue in the ED. We amputated the leg at the shin and then femur while trying to save him. He died of massive kidney failure from muscle injury. Dead muscle protein clogs the kidneys like taking a big dump clogs your toilet. Kidneys failed causing liver to fail and then lungs fill with fluid means they can't ventilate, and cardiac issues follow from electrolyte abnormalities. No amount of existing technology can bring you back from that, unfortunately. 3. One of my worst cases was a patient with really bad sepsis from an infection. All the blood vessels in your extremities constrict, so amputating fingers isn't all that common. But this was catastrophic, as we ultimately had to amputate all 4 limbs. I'll never forget writing that op report. You list each procedure for these documents, and it went, 1. Amputation left arm, 2. Amputation right arm, 3. Amputation left leg, 4. Amputation right leg. Patient was a Family Guy fan and said their Halloween costume would be the pirate the following year. At least they didn't lose their sense of humor, cause that was ultimately some funny shit. When I was a child, my dad's favorite joke whenever I hurt myself and cried was to grab a meat cleaver from the kitchen, hide it behind his back, examine my injury closely, prodding the sore spots with his finger, and after 45 seconds of examination of the bruising say, "I'm sorry son, we're going to have to amputate your _ insert leg/foot/limb. Hun. Come hold him down while I chop please," and he'd whip out the cleaver and carefully line it up while 6-year-old me would scream and try and squirm free and run away. He'd then usually say when I hobbled away, "Oh, so it must not be that bad after all. Hun, cancel that procedure, turns out he can actually walk." One time he did this and I caught him in the stomach with a little kick and he let out a little "oh fuck" and almost dropped the cleaver. So this reminded me of that. Thanks. Not a surgeon but used to work in a nursing home and I was meeting a patient for the first time without reading their file. As I entered the room I said, "Wakey wakey, let's jump out of bed," and as I looked at him I said, "Let's kick those covers off." Once I removed the blanket and saw he had no legs, things got quiet quick. Surgeon here, we go through extensive training so those moments don't happen. The only time I've even had that thought on the OR is in reaction to how far a patient has let the disease process go before seeking treatment, usually an infection. I am not a vascular surgeon, I'm another type, but when I was an intern on my vascular surgery rotation, I was participating in a BKA, below the knee amputation, and stabbed the attending surgeon with a rake, a surgical instrument. She was okay, didn't breach the skin. Bet you this is going to contain more not a surgeon but than actual surgeons reading this. Shoulda put a serious flare here bud, this thread's gonna need a toe tag. There's an amputation that set the record for both the fastest amputation, at the time, and most deaths, still the record holder. The surgeon performed the surgery so fast he took of his assistant's fingers in the same cut. Both the patient and the assistant died of infections. A gentleman viewing the surgery died of fright whilst watching, a heart attack in modern day one would assume. Why did he try to do it so quickly? Without anesthetic, surgeons tried to minimize pain by speed and getting the patient shit-faced on booze pre-operation. This isn't 100% on point. It close enough and I think interesting. I'm now a head and neck surgeon, but during my trauma rotation as an intern we had an extremely inebriated guy come in who'd been hit by a car just outside of the party he'd been at and suffered a traumatic amputation. The accident literally knocked his leg off at the knee. So he's wheeled into the trauma gurney on a bed, and his leg is brought into the room literally in a bucket of ice. The guy was super combative, trying to push us around, and at one point literally yelled "fuck off, let me walk it off." By my calculations he would have made it one step, two tops. I read this like the surgeons work alongside disembodied limbs for assistance. Like thing from Addams Family or something. Agreed with the surgeon above that our training is so long/detailed that we don't have these moments frequently. However, in residency I was doing a hemipelvectomy, essentially a removal of half of a patient's pelvis with or without removal of that leg, with my attending surgeon, and we came to a crucial step. After a few hours of dissection and planning we had made our cuts on the pelvis, basically planning and mapping out the portion we would remove. The time came for us to complete the cuts by levering out the half of the pelvis with our hands, which required a lot of force. After the levering, there was an audible crack, expected, but then the wound immediately filled with blood, unexpected. My training to that point told me to immediately pack the wound and hold pressure. My attending looked at me and said keep holding pressure, and then scrubbed out, took off his gown and gloves, and left the room. I'm now standing there over this young patient holding pressure with all my might so that my arms are shaking. I looked to anesthesia and his PA and asked what the hell was going on. Here I am single-handedly keeping this patient alive with no direction or immediate game plan about how to fix our problem. This was my oh fuck moment. An eternity, it seemed, went by and my attending came back in, scrubbed in, and we then methodically isolated the large bleeding vessels and tied them off/cauterized them. Afterwards I asked him what he was doing. He said over the years he had learned if he had a rise in anxiety from something unexpected, I guess his oh fuck moments, he would take a breather, whether physically removing himself from the situation or not, to refocus and psyche himself up to fix the issue. This was one of my greatest learning moments of my career. Nurse in an emergency department, accidentally amputated a toe that was rotting in a boot when I pulled it off the patient's foot. There were many fucks said that evening. Does that count? Not a surgeon, but I once took the legs off my sister's Barbie. I was about 8. That was a huge fuck up. I couldn't put them back in. In a panic I took the arms off too, hoping that it'd somehow help. It looked way worse. Had to hide the evidence in the bin. I've never told her what happened. the guilt is still there. I was a surgical tech in the early 1990s. We were doing an AKA on somebody with a gangrenous foot. We cut through the tissue and the giggly saw broke when we were 1/4 of the way through the femur. The hospital didn't have another. All of the ortho saws were in use. The doctor made me get the guy's leg under my arm, jump up in the air, come down with all my weight, and snap the femur at the point where we started sawing. It took 2 to 3 tries but then snapped and splintered. We used a rasp to smooth the bone. I was left holding the gangrenous lower leg. It was big, so I tried to bend it at the knee to get it in the specimen bag, at which point, a bunch of blood squirted out of the leg and all over the face of the circulating nerves. Not my finest day. I was 18 and being paid minimum wage. Took 5 surgeries to amputate my left leg BKA. 3 years later, wound still open. The worst part is the fool left all 3 bones protruding along with their nerves, so every step I take is like an electric shot. When I asked for some pain meds, he told me instead he would pray for me. Told him to stick his prayers up his ass, walked out and never went back. Filed a complaint with the AMA and his license was suspended. F/him. Not too long ago, here in Argentina there was a case, Spanish Link, where the doctor cut the wrong leg. After the shit show, this old lady was moved to another hospital to continue proper treatment, and she discovered after another medical review that it wasn't even needed to cut the remaining leg in the first place. She died some weeks later by a heart attack. Poor lady. Joke. Surgeons remove a man's leg, then discover it was the wrong one. They then remove the correct one. Why was the patient unable to sue? We had to do a double leg amputation, but I just couldn't get them even. Long story short, now he's just a torso. Not a doctor but a good friend of mine who's currently doing their residencies told me a fantastic story of when they were practicing leg amputations on a cadaver. A reasonable sized chunk of flesh flew off and went right into their mouth. This was followed by immediate vomiting and a week straight of Listerine smoothies. When asked about the taste and texture, they described it as salmon sushi with formaldehyde. I just hope they haven't developed a taste for human flesh, but just in case I'll be on guard. I work in the quality department for a large hospital system. We had a doc take off the right foot, instead of the left. That was a lot of fun paperwork, as well as a lawsuit. Wrong side surgeries are surprisingly more common than you'd think. Wrong side amputation, however, is thankfully more rare. As a med student, I used a giggly saw to remove a dead leg from just above the knee from a man who was homeless and horribly diabetic. When it came off, the surgeon said, "Here," and handed it to me. Then he said, "Take a picture, it's your first one," like someone was gonna have me hold it like a fish I caught. He was joking, but I was freaked out and dropped it on the floor. Such a weird moment in my training. You overestimate the quality of people on Reddit. Not a surgeon, nursing assistant. The surgeon was amputating above the knee. I noticed during the amputation that the patient's heart rate went up really high, which made me think he could have anesthesia awareness. This is a rare phenomenon when a patient is under anesthetic but can still sense what's happening around them, which can include feeling pain. I asked the surgeon if that was normal, and brought up anesthesia awareness. In between directing me and the other assistants, he explained that it was possible but that we couldn't stop the surgery over it. I found a break in the action and quickly leaned over to his ear to say, "I'm sorry." I never got to see him afterwards, so I'm still wondering if he heard me. Surgeons have better things to do than to browse Reddit. Like surgeoning. Helped at a leprosy hospital in the mid-90s in Calcutta. 2 memories. A big bottle of surgical spirits fell off a table and exploded into fire during an amputation. The doctor spilled some of the general anesthetic when injecting a patient. He continued with the amputation anyway. The patient started to come round early, so 4 of us had to prevent the patient from flailing around while the doctor finished sawing and then stitching. Had a trauma case one time where the paramedics said a dog amputated a patient's foot. We were expecting them to be blowing it out of proportion and got ready for just a severe bite. Nope, we were wrong. Patient rolls in and the foot is almost completely off except a piece of skin holding it together. Turns out the dog must been super pissed because it chomped right through. Casually reading this as a leg amputee was not a good idea. You should look up Robert Liston. Guy managed to kill his patient, his assistant, and a bystander. A grand total of 0 actual surgeons will post in this thread because they are afraid it will be used against them in the related malpractice case. Back when I was a med student, the trauma surgeon handed me clippers and said, "Go to it, you'll never do this again." The patient was an unfortunate woman who was asensate from the waist down due to a congenital condition. She had been left to rot in her bed by her nursing home, a representative of which kept referring to her as the customer, and wept crocodile tears about what had happened. A decup ulcer from hell had eaten through her entire goo area. Some exposed tube was too affected by gangrene to be discernible as intestine or vagina. The pelvic bones were exposed and stabilized in the air by her useless legs, which were stretched above to give some leverage. Legs were later amputated, as well as much of her insides. So I clipped away at the pelvic bone for an OM sample and didn't go into surgery. My dad works in the emergency. A guy got shot really bad in the shoulder and it just blew it up. He held the guy and his arm just fell off. The guy survived, but lost an arm. Doctor here. We are trained professionals who never make mistakes, so you're not gonna get any good answers. This is my uncle's story. He is a surgeon who specializes within multiple different fields. One day he was called in on a seriously injured girl who was all chopped up. The girl had been lying in a wheat field and fell asleep. Then a combine had come, not seeing her lying there, and ran over her. My uncle was called in immediately, and a 10-hour operation started going on. My uncle had to make multiple hard decisions on what limbs to keep, and what to throw away. She had to lose one leg, and one foot. However, the heel on one foot was good, so he switched that heel to the other foot, thereby making one whole leg working fine. He also switched around nerves from an arm that was destroyed to the other to make at least one of them functioning. The girl ended up surviving. Before her injury she was an active swimmer, and decided to let her injuries stop her. She participated in Paralympics multiple times, and even won, if my memory serves me right. My uncle was recently awarded knighting as gratitude for his services, mainly for wrist injuries. Not a surgeon, but one time I slept on my arm weird and it was numb for a while.